During my Christmas break from college, the joy of reuniting with my parents filled the house. Being away had made me miss them more than I expected. On my first day back, catching up with Mom in the den about college life was a familiar comfort. Dad was at work when I arrived, so Mom's warm welcome was the first greeting I received. Barely an hour into my return, the ring of the phone pierced the air, prompting Mom to rush and answer it. Her voice carried a tone of deep concern from where I sat, unable to decipher the conversation. Moments later, she entered the den, her expression signaling distress. "Rick, I need you to drive me to Mercy General," she urgently requested. The hospital was a familiar landmark in town. A shiver ran down my spine. "What's wrong, Mom?" "Is Dad okay?" "He's fine." That call was from Mrs. Miller. "Penny's been in an accident," she explained, her worry palpable. Dread surged within me. Of no Mom. "How bad is it?" "I don't know, Rick. Mrs. Miller is very upset, and I have to be there for her." Nodding, I dashed to my room, grabbing the car keys. Hurriedly, we both rushed into the car. I sped off initially, prompting Mom's plea to slow down, reminding me of the risk of another accident. I eased off the gas, keeping to the speed limit. As I drove, my mind fixated on Penny, the girl with bright blonde hair and striking blue eyes. The Millers became neighbors when I was just 7. Mom welcomed them with her homemade brownies, sparking an instant friendship between her and Mrs. Miller. They shared much in common, similar ages, both homemakers in a small town, both devoted to family. The only contrast, Mrs. Miller had a daughter, Penny, born just 6 days after me. I vividly recall the day the moving van parked in front of the house. A married couple stepped out with their daughter, her blonde hair styled in 2 braided pigtails. At that distance, she seemed adorable, yet it was hard to discern the details. I had my first close encounter with her merely 2 days later. A secretary from the front office escorted Penny into the classroom I occupied. Introductions flowed, Penny meeting the teacher and subsequently our class. The nerves were evident as she scanned the room, a new student mid-year, a daunting experience, even for a second grader. Our teacher guided Penny to the vacant desk adjacent to mine, and she offered a shy smile as she settled in. Our initial conversation occurred during lunch in the bustling cafeteria. By then, cliques had formed, dividing us into tables of either all boys or all girls. Penny, having been detained by the teacher after the lunch bell, lingered as the last in line for food. While George animatedly recounted his escapades, my attention was on Penny. Balancing her tray, she surveyed the cafeteria, seemingly uncertain. None of the girls extended an invitation to join them, so she ventured to the rear and sat alone at an unoccupied table. Despite the likelihood of teasing from my friends later, I picked up my tray and joined her, taking a seat across from her. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by that familiar shy smile. "Hi, I'm Ricky," I initiated. "Hello, Ricky. My name's Penny," she responded, although her name had already been introduced to the class. "You live on Maple Street, right?" I asked. She appeared taken aback. "Yes, I do." "How did you know that?" A mischievous grin crept onto my face. "I live across the street, and I saw you, your mom, and Dad when you moved in." That was the genesis of our connection. She shared that her dad had taken on a new job, prompting their move from a town 2 hours away. Leaving her friends behind had left her feeling down. When the bell rang, I walked her back to class, but the day didn't offer us any further chance to converse. As school ended, she mentioned her mom picking her up. Parents who fetched their kids parked in front, while bus riders congregated at the back where the buses waited. Upon arriving home that afternoon, a mouth-watering scent greeted me. Freshly baked brownies wafted through the air. Rushing into the kitchen, hoping for an afternoon treat, I found Mom chuckling and nodding toward a plate of tempting squares cooling on the counter. Snatching one, I noticed another plate being wrapped in foil. She mentioned taking it to our new neighbors across the street as a welcome gift. And foil. She mentioned taking it to our new neighbors across the street as a welcome gift. Excitedly, I asked if I could accompany her, a request that she happily granted. Mom rang the doorbell, and moments later, Mrs. Miller greeted us at the door, Penny standing slightly behind her with a smile. Our mothers exchanged introductions and conversed briefly before my mom introduced me to Mrs. Miller. In turn, Mrs. Miller introduced her daughter Penny, mentioning that we were classmates. Mom handed over the plate of brownies, which Mrs. Miller graciously accepted, offering one each to Penny and me. Another delicious brownie in hand, a delightful treat. As we left, I'd offered to help Penny find her way to the bus stop. Mrs. Miller asked if Penny would like to ride the bus, and Penny nodded in agreement. The following morning, I knocked on their door and escorted Penny to the bus stop, accompanying her on the ride to school. I disregarded the teasing from my friends and sat with her at lunch again that day. After school, we rode the bus together, and I walked her home, initiating a routine that became a daily occurrence. From then on, we were nearly inseparable. Afternoons and weekends were spent playing together. Our swing sets in the backyards became our favorite spots, occupying hours of our time. Inclement weather simply meant shifting our games indoors. Even in high school, we remained constant companions. While we hung out with a group of friends, we weren't romantically involved. It wasn't for lack of desire on my part. I had always harbored feelings for Penny that only grew stronger with time. However, I didn't believe she saw me as anything beyond a friend from across the street. Our relationship persisted this way until the first week of our senior year. Neither of us dated anyone else. I couldn't fathom her reason, but for me, she was the only one I wanted. Then tragedy struck. Penny's father suffered a massive stroke and passed away. It was after his funeral that everything changed. Friends and acquaintances gathered at their house to offer condolences and support. In a corner, Penny sat, tears streaming down her face, and it tore at my heart. I reached out, placing my arm around her, but she pushed me away sharply. "Go away. Your father is still alive. Stay away from me," she spat through her tears. Stunned, I staggered back, staring at her as she wept into her hands. I didn't know how to respond. I left quietly, heading back to my house. Collapsing on my bed, I couldn't help but cry. My tears were for Penny and her immense loss. Her father had meant the world to her, and I could only hope that her words stem from grief and pain, not true feelings towards me. I didn't see Penny for the remainder of the week. She stayed home from school. Despite my strong desire to offer comfort, her words lingered in my mind, prompting me to give her space to grieve. However, the following Monday, I waited in my car as usual, anticipating our ride to school together. To my surprise, she walked past me, heading for the bus stop. I reversed and pulled up beside her, where she stood with a couple of other kids. She shot me a glare. "I told you to go away," she snapped. I stared at her briefly, then slowly drove off. Hurt pierced me deeply. My closest friend and the girl I secretly loved had turned against me. I rushed to class, concealing my tears behind a book. Despite our usual table at lunch, she chose another and refused to acknowledge me. That evening, I confided in my mother about Penny. She tried to soothe my pain, reassuring me that Penny was hurting and would come around. I clung to hope, but hope waned as Penny distanced herself from our friends, eventually dating a baseball team jock and joining a different social circle. My heart shattered. Throughout our senior year, I withdrew, foregoing outings with friends and cocooning myself at home. Mom fretted over me, but didn't press, sensing my emotions. Weekends were especially hard, witnessing her boyfriend honk outside her house, watching Penny rush to his car from my window. In response, I buried myself in academics. Graduation arrived and I left for college. With honors, I graduated high school and secured admission to a university 200 miles away. I had only returned home for Thanksgiving and now for Christmas. The last words Penny had uttered to me were the day she instructed me to leave her alone at the bus stop. Now the only girl I had ever loved lay in the hospital, and I was driving Mum to be with Mrs. Miller. Dropping Mum off at the entrance, I promised to find parking and join her soon. Rushing back inside, I inquired at the check-in desk for Penny's whereabouts, receiving her room number on the second floor. Locating the elevator, I made my way to her room. Peeking inside, I spotted Mom embracing Mrs. Miller, offering comfort. When Mom noticed me, she nodded for me to enter, granting permission to join them. As I entered the room, my gaze fixed on Penny lying in the bed. Her left arm rested in a cast, her head bandaged, an IV taped to one arm, and a heart monitor rhythmically beeping. My heart ached seeing the girl I loved in such a state. Fighting the impulse to rush to her side, I settled in a chair opposite Mrs. Miller. She was like a second mother to me, and I felt her pain alongside Penny's. Eventually, Mrs. Miller shared what had happened. A trip to the mall with a friend had ended in a collision. A pickup truck running a red light had struck their car broadside, resulting in Penny's injuries. Her arm was broken, but the most critical damage was from her head hitting the dashboard. Doctors couldn't assess the severity immediately. Penny remained in a chemically induced coma. We sat in silence thereafter, the heart monitor providing the only sound. It grew late, and my mom mentioned the need to return home to prepare dinner for my dad. Reluctantly, I knew I had to leave since I'd driven us there. Mrs. Miller expressed gratitude for our visit, and when asked if we could help, she only requested we look after her little dog. Promising to do so, I assured her I'd return in the morning. That night, sleep was elusive. My dreams were consumed by thoughts of Penny. Sleep was elusive. My dreams were consumed by thoughts of Penny. The following morning, after a hurried breakfast, I rushed back to the hospital. Mrs. Miller was still present, seated in a chair beside Penny's bed. They'd brought in a rollaway bed, but she was awake, discussing the situation with me. She informed me that doctors planned to continue the induced coma until the swelling in Penny's brain subsided, allowing her to naturally awaken. Mrs. Miller expressed her need to return home to freshen up. I promised to stay with Penny. Alone by Penny's bedside, I gently held her uninjured hand, speaking softly, urging her to recover. Tears streamed down my face as I talked. At one point, a nurse entered, reassuring me to remain seated. By the time Mrs. Miller returned, I was still engaged in conversation with Penny and hadn't noticed her arrival. Startled by her approach, I quickly stood up. "No, Ricky, stay right there. I understand your pain," she assured me. "I believe she'll pull through. I have this feeling," I insisted. "I'm sorry she pushed you away, Rick. I know she cares for you, but losing her father has been so difficult," she empathized. "It's okay. She has her own path. All I want is for her to recover," I replied. I stayed until visiting hours ended and returned early the following day. The routine continued for the next 5 days. I arrived at the crack of dawn, departing only when asked to leave. By the 3rd day, they ceased the drugs maintaining her coma. It wasn't until the 5th day that Penny finally opened her eyes. Her mother and I were talking quietly when we noticed her gazing at us. Mrs. Miller gasped, and I hurried to inform the nurse of Penny's awakening. Returning to her room, I was soon asked by the doctor to wait outside. Anxiously pacing, I waited for updates on her condition. Eventually, Mrs. Miller emerged in tears, and I rushed to comfort her. "She's awake, but she doesn't recognize me," she sobbed. We waited together until the doctor emerged, his expression a mix of uncertainty. "Mrs. Miller, it appears your daughter is experiencing amnesia following the head trauma. She has no memory of her past. This isn't uncommon, but it's hard to predict when her memories will return." Mrs. Miller sought guidance. "What should we do?" "Just be with her and talk. It might trigger her memory," the doctor advised. Returning to Penny's room, Mrs. Miller approached her gently. "Hello, Penny. I'm so glad you're awake." Penny looked at her mother with confusion. "I'm your mother, dear. You've been in an accident." Penny nodded, glancing at me with the same uncertainty. Penny nodded, glancing at me with the same uncertainty. "This is Rick. He's your best friend," Mrs. Miller introduced. "Hello, Rick," Penny greeted tentatively. "Hello, Penny. It's great to see you awake," I responded. We spent the next couple of hours conversing with Penny until I had to leave. Rushing home, I shared the news with my parents, expressing concern that Penny couldn't remember anything. That night, I said a prayer for her recovery, as I had done each night. Grateful for her awakening, I asked for her lost memories to be restored. For the following week, Penny's condition remained unchanged. Christmas arrived, and she remained in the hospital. I spent the morning celebrating with my family before heading to see her. Despite her memory loss, she recognized Christmas and its significance. I had bought her a gift, an elegant white gold chain with a purple gem and amethyst, her birthstone. She seemed pleased, requesting my help to put it on, due to her casted arm. On New Year's Eve, the doctor decided to discharge Penny, suggesting that familiar surroundings might aid in triggering her memory. I assisted Mrs. Miller in getting her home, watching as Penny explored the house, everything seeming new to her. It was tough witnessing her disorientation. That night, my family gathered, and we welcomed the new year together. The morning of New Year's Day, Mrs. Miller visited us. My job has been understanding, but I have to return. Unconcerned about leaving Penny alone, she shared, despite having insurance to cover the house, she still needed to return. I'm concerned about leaving Penny alone. She shared, despite having insurance to cover the house, she still needed to work. Mom took her hands reassuringly. Donna, I'll be here. I'll happily take care of her. I'll be here too, I immediately offered. You should go back to school, Rick, my mother advised. I won't go back now. Penny needs us all, I insisted. I'll return next semester, but this is more important. Understanding Penny's significance to me, Mom nodded, and even Dad didn't object. I contacted the school, explaining the situation, and they allowed me to drop my classes, crediting the fees toward the next semester. For the following months, Penny came to our house daily while her mother worked. We conversed and reminisced in attempts to help her recall memories. I remember when you first moved here, I recounted. It started raining, and we snuck outside to play in the puddles. Mom found us covered in mud. Penny chuckled. Really? It's true. We both got a scolding, Mom interjected. Then, when we were 10, we sneaked out to spend the night in my fort. Our parents were frantic searching for us the next day. I got a spanking I won't forget, I recalled. Were we always this mischievous? Penny wondered. No, sweetie. Both of you were usually the most loving and well-behaved kids, but you had your moments, Mom revinced. Penny appeared contemplative. I just wish I could remember, she expressed. Day after day we delved into our childhood. I recounted stories while she listened, occasionally posing questions. Despite my fervent hope for her memories to return, they remained elusive. Mrs. Miller attempted to involve other friends of Penny, but their visits tapered off, finding it unsettling to converse with someone who didn't recognize them. Summer was looming, and I realized my presence wasn't aiding Penny's memory recovery. I discussed returning to school with my parents. Though the summer semesters were brief, I could resume my studies. As much as I cherished being with her, I sensed that if her memories returned, she might push me away once more. It was our final day together before my return to school. Seated in her room, I struggled to find new stories to share, having revisited nearly our entire history. Rick, did we ever date? Penny's unexpected question caught me off guard. No, we never did, I replied, trying to veil the sadness in my tone. It just feels like we were so close. We were for a long time, I affirmed. You said like we're not close anymore. Did something happen between us? I had intentionally avoided discussing events after her father's passing until now. Suddenly, it struck me like lightning. She had never inquired about her father. Despite numerous pictures in her room, she never asked about him, almost as if she deliberately avoided the topic. I abruptly excused myself, telling her I needed to talk to her mother and to wait there. Finding Mrs. Miller in the kitchen, I asked, "Has Penny ever asked about her father?" She paused and thought, "No, now that you mention it, she never has. She hasn't asked me about him either. This might be what she's blocking out. If it's okay, I'd like to take her for a drive." Mrs. Muller agreed, and I returned to invite Penny along. She inquired about our destination, but I simply asked for her trust. 20 minutes later, we arrived at the cemetery. Penny gazed at me questioningly, following as I led her through the gates. We halted in front of a particular grave. "Penny, this is where your father is resting," I softly said. She looked at the headstone, taking in the engraved name and date. Retrieving a large envelope from Mrs. Miller, I pulled out a picture and handed it to Penny. "This is your father. You two shared a close bond, and he cherished you deeply," I murmured. We lingered there in quiet contemplation. Penny studied the photo and then glanced back at the headstone. Finally, she turned to me, tears welling in her eyes. "I'd wish I could remember him," she said with a heavy heart. Disappointed that the breakthrough I had hoped for didn't occur, I led her back to the car and drove her home. Upon arrival, I mentioned needing to finish packing. We bid our goodbyes with the promise that I'd visit her once more before departing for school. The next morning, after loading my car, I headed across the street. Since it was a Saturday, Mrs. Miller was home. The three of us sat and conversed at the kitchen table. When it was time to leave, I embraced Mrs. Miller and Penny. As I headed out, I heard Penny speak softly, almost in a whisper. "I'm sorry, Ricky," she said. I halted and looked back. Ricky was my childhood name, long replaced by Rick. "What did you say?" I inquired. Tears streamed down Penny's cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how I treated you." "You remember," I exclaimed, hope surging through me. Penny stood, head bowed, tears cascading. "Yes, I dreamt of Daddy last night, and this morning everything came back." Mrs. Miller and I burst into elation, embracing Penny tightly. "Why didn't you tell us this morning?" Mrs. Miller questioned. Penny sobbed. "I knew Ricky was coming, and I felt ashamed of how I treated him after Daddy passed." "I'm so sorry, Ricky." I gently lifted her chin, meeting her gaze. "It's all right, Penny. What matters is that you're back now." Penny wept and hugged me tightly. "I loved you, Ricky, but losing Daddy and seeing you still with your father, it hurt so much. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I've missed you." Holding her close, I whispered, "I missed you too, more than you know." I postponed my departure for school until the following day. There was a jubilant celebration marking Penny's return. My parents arrived immediately upon hearing the news. Later that evening, Penny and I sat on a garden bench in the backyard. After a moment of quiet, Penny spoke up. "How come you don't hate me?" Penny's voice was soft as she spoke. I knew it was time to be honest. "Hate you? I could never, Penny. I've always loved you too much for that." "You love me?" Her question hung in the air, and I simply nodded. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked. "I was scared, afraid of risking our friendship if things went wrong," I confessed. "Me too," Penny admitted. "I thought you didn't feel the same way because you never said anything. You never even asked me out. But I've always loved you too." "But what about Jim?" I inquired, referring to her previous relationship. "That was just me trying to cope. I never loved him. We barely did anything. Well, we did kiss, but it wasn't what I wanted," she explained. Our eyes met, and in that moment, our lips drew closer, meeting in a kiss that ignited a surge of emotion. Our kiss intensified, tongues entwined, expressing years of unspoken love. I held her tightly, pouring all my feelings into that moment. When our lips finally parted, Penny shifted to sit in my lap, drawing me in for another kiss. Her touch sent shivers down my spine, and I hoped she felt the same. "I love you, Ricky," Penny whispered in my ear. My embrace tightened. "I love you too, Penny, more than you know." We spent the next hour wrapped in each other's arms, talking softly, until Mrs. Miller came out and spotted us. She smiled and left us to our moment. Walking hand in hand, Penny and I re-entered the house to find our parents with warm smiles. Saying goodbye to her that night was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. The following day, Penny and her mother visited to bid me farewell. My classes were starting soon, so I had to leave. After saying goodbye to our parents, Penny walked me to my car. We shared a passionate kiss, and as she pulled away, tears welled in her eyes. "I love you. I'll wait for you," she said, words that meant the world to me. Parting from her that night after our first kiss was tough, but the next 6 weeks were even more agonizing. The only solace I found was in nightly calls, thanks to an unlimited long-distance plan on my cell phone. With 2 intense courses during the short semester, I balanced classes, study sessions, and precious conversations with Penny, going to bed only after our night talks. On my final day of classes, I prepped my car with my belongings before the last exam. After turning in my test, I made a beeline for the car, eager to head home. The 4-hour drive felt like an eternity. As I pulled into the driveway, the front door flung open, and Penny sprinted across the lawn, leaping into my arms. Her kiss was electric, and I knew I'd never tire of it. Finally setting her down, I saw my mother patiently waiting on the porch. Wrapping an arm around Penny, we went to greet her. Later, when we were alone, Mom revealed Penny had arrived 3 hours early, nervously waiting for my return. She chuckled, liking Penny's nerves to a cat surrounded by rocking chairs. Throughout the weekend, Penny and I were inseparable. We snuck away for a movie on Saturday night, and as I sat with my arm around her in the theater, thoughts of my dad's old tales about taking my mom to drive-in movies surfaced. Unfortunately, the last one nearby had closed ages ago, but that didn't stop us from stealing a few kisses. Come Sunday night, Penny instructed me to wait until her mother had left for work and then come over. She'd leave the door unlocked. Monday morning, after an early breakfast with my parents, I watched from my window as Mrs. Miller departed for her job. When Dad left for work too, I told Mom I was off to meet Penny. There was something on her mind, but she simply nodded and said, "Oak." I hurried across the street, knocking on Penny's door before stepping inside. Following the music, I found her in her room, standing in a robe. We met halfway, our arms entwining as our lips united in a deep kiss. Penny took my hand, guiding me to sit on her bed while she remained standing. Nervousness radiated from her, but with a sigh, she loosened the sash of her robe. It slipped down her arms, pooling at her feet. My breath hitched as I took in her nude form, every inch captivating me for several breathtaking seconds. She had a figure that to me seemed perfect. Her slender waist gracefully flowed into defined hips, outlining exquisite curves. But as I continued to gaze upward, meeting her beautiful blue eyes, they seemed to plead for my words. Meeting her beautiful blue eyes, they seemed to plead for my words. Goodness, Penny, you're more stunning than I ever imagined. I managed to say, my voice catching. Her eyes sparkled, finally gracing me with a smile. "So you've pictured me in the nude?" she teased, a playful glint in her eyes. "Yes, quite often," I replied, feeling my cheeks grow warm. She took 2 steps closer, reached down, and playfully tugged the hem of my t-shirt over my head. As she pulled me closer, I glanced down, watching her hands unbutton my jeans and tug the zipper. It was clear that I was the first man she'd ever seen naked in person, just as she was the first woman I'd seen in such a state. We both confessed our inexperience and virginity. Now I've encountered images of unclothed women on the internet, acquainting myself with various body shapes and sizes over time. Eventually, Penny led me into the bathroom, and we took our first shower. I swear she literally purred as I soaked up her body and ran my hands over it. I melted until she soaked up her hands and started stroking me. After drying off, we returned to the bed where she laid me on my back. I lay still, watching as she continued to explore my body. "Was everything okay?" she asked. "It was more than okay. It was mind-blowing," I replied. She giggled. "I even think I was blowing your mind," she replied, frowning her eyebrows. I laughed and flipped her over onto her back, so that I was now on top of her. "Was everything okay?" I chuckled, repeating her earlier question. Penny playfully rubbed my chest. "You know exactly what you did to me." We sat, talking for several hours. Both of us acknowledged that our first experience together had exceeded expectations. And then Penny shared the great news that she had received financial aid and would be joining me at the same school in the fall. The separation anxiety dissipated. All my hopes were realized with this discovery. We knew Mom would be making dinner for us, and we didn't want her to have to look for us. When we walked in together, Mom didn't say a word, just stared at both of us intently. I noticed Penny blush slightly, and I swear for a second, I saw the corners of Mom's mouth quiver in a smile. We were 6 weeks away from leaving for school. We made love almost every day when her mom was at work. I'm already sure it wasn't a secret to either of our parents, but we tried to remain discreet. The day we left for school, Penny came with me. She had left her car at home as she didn't think we would need more than one at school. Another fortunate coincidence was that she got a room in my dorm. It was a 4-story girls' dormitory. The first and third floors were for female students, and the second and fourth floors were for men. Nothing prevented members of the opposite sex from being on another floor. Penny had a roommate, but she rarely saw her since she lived with me. I was lucky to have a private room. Time flew by, and soon we were back home for Christmas vacation. Shortly after returning home, I discussed my plans with my father, and he agreed to lend me some money to buy a present for Penny. On Christmas morning, she and her mom and my parents and I came to our house to open presents. I saved mine for her for last. She was sitting on the couch between our moms when I walked over and got down on one knee. Penny cast a curious glance at me. "Penny, you've been a part of my life for as long as I can remember, and my love for you has only grown stronger. Even though graduation isn't here yet, I've always hoped that when the time came, you'd agree to be my wife." As I spoke, I opened a small jewelry box, revealing a white gold ring adorned with 2 diamonds flanking a sizable amethyst, identical to the one I gave her a year ago in the hospital. Penny's eyes welled up with tears. "Yes, Ricky, I will marry you," she exclaimed. Tears streamed down all 3 women's faces as I slipped the ring onto her left hand. Our families joined in celebrating, making it a truly joyful Christmas. We spent the rest of the school year together in my room. By the following summer, after saving money from our jobs, we announced to our parents our plan to rent an apartment upon returning to school. Surprisingly, there were no objections. I graduated a semester earlier than Penny, and just 6 days after her graduation, we tied the knot. Until then, the best days of my life had been the day we first made love, and the day she agreed to marry me. But that day she said yes became one of 3 pivotal and joyous moments. I had thought nothing could surpass those days until I stood in a hospital room, holding our newborn daughter in my arms, tears of happiness streaming down my face. Penny smiled, witnessing the overwhelming joy in my eyes. Life with Penny was a beautiful journey, and this moment added to its blessings. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.